All right, Dan, it is 12:30. So to be cognizant of time, I'm going to kick it over to Dan first to get us started real quick.
Great. Thanks, Becky. And yeah, good to see everybody here. Glad we're having this opportunity to do something that we think is a really relevant topic. And there's been a lot of information out there. So I want to say thank you in advance to Brian Slotsky and his team at the Michigan Department of Ed just to continue to communicate the flexibility we do or don't have regarding pupil accounting this year. And it's going to be something we're all going to be wanting to pay attention to. So that's number one. Thank you all. Second is another big issue that we're hearing from all of you out there running schools is the talent issue, the staffing issues. So we just wanted to give you a quick reminder that as you're looking in your schools, and this may not be your area of responsibility, but if you know people are looking for people at your school, MAPSA does have an alternative certification program. It's the Professional Innovators in Teaching program. Works really well. It's real time, cohort-based coaching model. We've recently added a component which has really been a helpful thing, a component to assist candidates in passing the MTTC course. So just know that that's out there. Again, that's not the subject of today's program, but really important to know that there's things we're trying to do to help you as you're doing your jobs this year and running your schools. Again, we'll put I think Heather just put a link to that program in the chat if you want to get more information about that while you're listening. But let's just get started. Couple quick things about today. It is being recorded, so we're going to post this later today in the Mastermind Network so that you and or others at your school can watch this program. As we're going throughout this, please do chat any questions that you have in the chat box. Please chat them to everyone. Several of us will be watching that and try to help the MDE team keep track of those and provide some answers. Also, don't hesitate as you're in the chat to share some best practices. Maybe it's something that your local community has been doing, et cetera. Maybe your school has come up with as a solution. We'll try to save those and share them as well. But that's it. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to turn over to Alicia to give you a very quick update on other things that are happening from Lansing and or the legislature. And then we'll get right into the heart of our webinar today. Alicia.
Thanks, Dan. Wanted to just give you guys a brief update on a couple things going on with the legislature. The good news is there's nothing charter specific going on, but there's a handful of bills that we are watching. One of them is a merit curriculum bill that is a financial literacy bill. So it would require financial literacy. That in and of itself sounds like a great idea. And most of you that weighed in with me on the Mastermind Network, and if you're not on there watching that, please do in the future. But most of you that weighed in thought it was a good idea to include that in the merit curriculum. But the devil's in the details there and trying to figure out how to include it, where to include it. Is it social studies? Is it math? How do you get a certified teacher to teach it? What certifications do they need? So there's a lot of behind the scenes things that go into that. So we're continuing to work with the bill sponsor and others to try to make sense of that. A couple other bills coming out of the Senate dealing with vaccines and masks and critical race theory issues. I expect that those bills, if they do pass the House, will be vetoed. We haven't yet delved too much into them because of that issue. And then recently, we alerted you a couple weeks ago of a new package of bills called Let Kids Learn. These are opportunity scholarships for low-income foster care children and students with disabilities. They're scholarship granting organizations that individuals and corporations can get a tax credit for donating their portion of their tax responsibility to the student opportunity scholarships. And then the student or the granting organizations could then give those that money directly to families to use for educational needs, including public school students. So it's $500 for a public school student, $1,100 for a foster care or child with a disability. Those things can be used for tutoring, devices, school uniforms, transportation, all kinds of things that are outside of the school day, but could still be provided by the school. So some really interesting things there. We do expect that those bills pass both the House and Senate this week, and late finished at 2 a.m. the other day. But we do expect that those bills will be vetoed. Stay tuned on what's next for those. But I think that's it. That's what we're watching right now.
Thanks, Alicia. I appreciate that. So let's just get right into it. And again, I want to say thank you to the team here from the Michigan Department of Education. Even with all the great information that's been shared from the department, from all kinds of sources to schools, we've noticed it's still confusing. People are still trying to make sure they understand what the rules are, what they aren't, how flexible can they be, especially when there's a lot of different changing health communication going on depending on where you are in the state. So we thought today would be really important to get that word out, making sure you know what flexibility you do have, and there is flexibility. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm just going to quickly run through the team. You'll see the names here: Jessica Beagle, Brian Slotsky, Jeff McNeil, and Steve Nemke. So thanks, guys, for being here. I don't know how you want to handle your presentation, but we're happy to have you here and appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Dan. This is Brian Slotsky. I work with Jessica Beagle in State Aid and School Finance. Both of us are heavily involved with pupil accounting. We also man the Innovation Council. So we're quite used to it. In fact, Jeff and Steve are also part of the council as well. And I don't know if you've ever had involvement in that, but districts often bring hypothetical scenarios to the council to see, what flexibilities are available and how they might implement a new or interesting program. So with that in mind, I'm hoping that your audience will feel comfortable with sharing any questions that they may have. We're all here to help. And that said, I will get started. I should warn you that this slide deck is short, but it's fairly dry. The most interesting part of this presentation is going to come from the questions that you folks ask. So the first thing that we are trying to get everyone up to speed on is the change that took place with regard to teacher certification and membership. So this is a citation from Section 6 of the State School Aid Act. This particular subsection is helping us define what instructional time is, or what it looks like, and who it must be with. And for this year, we are auditing districts for teacher placements at the grade level. Now, I want to be very careful in how we approach this, because districts still do need to ensure that teachers are being placed appropriately for the subject area as well. This year, grade level is attached to membership, which is going to be the larger portion of money. But if you have a misplacement, there could still be a deduction for that subject area. Next year, things are really going to change in terms of what the auditors are looking at. They're going to be checking both grade level and subject area placement. There are trainings being planned right now for all the auditors to get them up to speed on the process and what to look for. Our recommendation is that auditors this year also check for subject area placement issues. If they happen to spot one, that gives the districts the opportunity to recognize an issue and correct it before next year. So this year is a good opportunity for us to test and practice for what the requirements will be next year. But next year it is going to significantly increase with membership also being tied to subject area placements. This year, we all know the flexibility with the days and hours is no longer available, at least at this time. So districts need to plan on providing or scheduling 180 days of instruction and 1,098 hours. Now, some things that come into play would be districts that have waivers for things like travel time. That's going to be certain groups of students that would be allowed to have less instructional hours. Additional forgiven time and forgiven time, of course, both can be used to help districts satisfy those instructional time requirements should there be some sort of cancellation. And then we have programs that might be operating under an alternative or innovative program waiver, which could reduce their days and hours. But generally, those are for, again, just pockets of students, not the entire district. The other thing that a few districts, very few, could have is a collective bargaining agreement that would allow them to provide for less than 180 days and 1,098 hours. Professional development time is always something that we encourage districts to look into. At the beginning of each year, we caution districts, you don't want to necessarily build the professional development in to your calendar without planning for that subsection to potentially change. So our recommendation at the beginning of the school year, before the school year, when we're getting this question, is to add your 5 days of PD or whatever it may be, in addition to the 180 days. And then if the legislation remains unchanged, you can back those days back down. So if you are using PD, there's going to be some documentation that you should be prepared to provide to your auditors. I would ask your auditor now, if you are using PD, what exactly are they going to ask for? Some auditors are asking for verification of attendance at the professional development meetings, because the district, in order to count the PD, must have at least 75% of the teachers there. So that might be something that they ask for. As far as I know, all districts want to see the PD show up as part of their calendar of scheduled instructional time. And they'll be checking a few other things. So do get with your auditor now and just run through the question of basically what are they going to ask you for, to make sure that you've got that documentation ready. Attendance is also returned to pre-pandemic. Last year, it was quite a bit different. We only had to measure attendance once a month. And that entailed the district having to have, one two-way interaction with at least 75% of their students during that month for 9 months of their school year. So if you had a 10-month school year, you could pick or choose, which month you wanted to use based on, what your percentages look like. This year, it's a straight 180 days. You need to meet the 75% requirement, with a few exceptions, of course. If a district is canceling or has had to cancel instruction already this year, we want people to know that if you happen to reschedule that instructional time at the end of your school calendar, rather than it being held to a 75% requirement, you can use 60%. So that might be helpful. Another thing some districts have is a waiver for an alternative education program that allows them to operate at 50% attendance and remain okay as in terms of state aid deductions. So that's something that some districts may have, but again, that waiver likely does not cover your entire student body. Part-time students excluded, really instead of part-time, because to me, when I read that now, part-time refers to a kid that is being claimed for less than a full FTE, or just simply doesn't have a full-time schedule. And that's not really what we're talking about. Part-time here refers to a student who has irregular attendance. So they're not expected to actually appear in person at the district. So if that's the case, those students are excluded from your attendance calculation. And similarly, our 100% virtual students are excluded from your 75% attendance calculation. So this is a question that comes up quite often, who does a day count for when the 75% attendance requirement is met? So we have districts that may have a building that is going to be closed for a day, yet they are able to meet the 75% attendance for the students that are scheduled for instruction that day. And the question often is, can we count that day and those hours for the building that was closed? And the answer, and I shouldn't say closed, it really is these students were not scheduled for instruction that day. So think about when you're doing your state assessments. Not all of your students are going to be scheduled for instruction on those days. And if that's the case, the day and hours don't count for those students who are not scheduled to be in attendance. They would likely, if a district did not prepare correctly or plan correctly, be short of the 180 day and 1,090 hour requirements. So just by having 75% attendance on a day does not mean that all students get to count those days in hours. You have to make sure that everyone is scheduled for at least 180 days and 1,090 hours. Virtual learning, and this is where we start to get into some of our flexibilities. And virtual learning is still allowed this year. It's part of the State School Aid Act. It is found in Section 21F. And there are a couple things that changed from last year. Last year, we didn't have a need to develop EDPs for students. This year, that requirement has returned. The same thing with parental consent. Last year, you didn't need to have parental consent, but that requirement has returned this year. So most districts to meet those requirements are sending out surveys to their students at the beginning of the school year. And I should say to their families, really. And the survey basically is a way to collect that parental consent. And then it's also a way for the district to pose a question to the student that would help the district to begin the EDP. So you don't need to have a complete EDP, you just need to have one started. It's a living document. We don't expect them to be complete, especially during the October count. So you send out that survey, you ask for parental consent, you capture that, you ask them, the student a question perhaps about their learning style, or maybe some topics that they're interested in. And then you make that part of the EDP and you're good to go as far as that requirement is concerned. So it seems like it may be daunting to get the EDPs going, but it's really not. We can get them moving pretty quick with a simple survey and one question. All courses that are going to be offered that are virtual do need to be approved by the school board. I think that most districts are taking the entire course catalog from the vendor that they work with and bringing that to a board meeting and having their board sign off on that catalog as part of their approved curriculum. So if that is what's happening in your district, make sure you keep the meeting minutes so that you can show where this approval occurred. And then make sure you keep a copy of the catalog that was approved by the board so that you know which courses can be offered. Another thing that districts would need to be prepared for, and if you're developing your own virtual courses, and those virtual courses are basically a version of a course that's already offered by the district, this should be a very easy thing to meet as well. And that is the requirement to have a syllabus for your courses. These don't need to be extremely detailed, but minimally they should inform folks of what is going to be taught in each section of the course. And I did skip that last question. I'll just I'll speak to it real quick just so you know why I didn't mention it. But for LEA districts, if they want to use the third-party supplied teacher as a teacher of record, they're having to pull permits for those individuals this year. Because you are a PSA, you do not have to directly hire your teaching staff. So the permits are not going to apply to your teaching staff unless the teacher is not certified appropriately for the subject that's being taught. So if that's the case, then you still need to seek out that permit. Now, I did mention virtual. I think distance learning, which is this next slide, might be the best option for districts that have to pivot quickly to some form of remote learning. It doesn't have the same set of requirements that are part of 21F. So you don't need parental consent. You don't need to have an EDP developed. But what it is emulating the in-classroom experience. So teachers, must be, on that platform, whether it be Zoom or Teams or whatever the district uses for the entire class period. And attendance is going to be taken by the teacher just as it would if the students were in person, and absences are recorded. So distance learning is not virtual. It is another form of in-person in our eyes. One other question that we've received quite a few times this year is with regard to districts that want to offer a virtual program to students. And they want to do so, but they don't want to offer the same number of courses in that virtual curriculum as they would to a full-time student who's in person. And we would recommend highly against going that route, simply because it's going to then raise the question of how are these students still being considered full-time, because our measure of full-time is how many courses the student has on their schedule, and your virtual courses are supposed to be comparable to what a student is receiving in person and not generate additional FTE. So if you've decided to offer 5 courses instead of 6 like you would in an in-person environment, I would right now have a conversation with your auditor to see if that's okay. And if not, what needs to be done to make sure that you don't lose any FTE. And one other thing to mention is that some districts have made the choice of reducing the number of courses that are required in a virtual environment based on a student's needs, and that's fine to do. If you're able to get or place that student under a reduced schedule, you might be able to still count it for a full FTE. But likely, if you're doing that, it means that you're basically agreeing to a prorated FTE. Another thing, and I don't know how many PSAs get heavily involved in work-based learning, but now we have work-based learning students who are being affected by closures, and what to do basically for a student who can't attend that work-based learning experience during that quarantine or closure. And our recommendation is to replace the work-based learning experience on the student's schedule with courses. And this may be temporary, but it's going to definitely help you avoid an FTE deduction. And if you've emailed Jessica or I recently, you would have seen that on the bottom of our email and our signature, we've included some resources that we believe are helpful to districts. The one that I do want to point out specifically is the district strategies for continued instruction during COVID-19 closures. That's a mouthful. That one came out on September 2nd, and basically will guide you through what options you have, including offering students virtual or distance learning, and it does so with a little bit more detail than I've provided here today. But it also speaks to options that may not necessarily provide the students additional instruction during that closure, and what to expect. So the district, for instance, that has a closure but is not offering virtual or distance learning, they're going to mark those students either as absent if it's you know, a pocket of students, or it would just be considered a canceled day. And those two things may or may not raise some complications during your audit. So if that's happening with your district, or if that's your district's plan currently, again, have a conversation with your auditor to make sure that they don't find an issue with it. And this is the final slide. Here's our contact information, provided contact information for both Jessica and I, and Steve and Jeff. Steve and Jeff have been part of many of these conversations. If you're thinking about doing something that might fall in the alternative education realm, they are definitely your resources. They also are the folks that work with the offline waiver and the day and hour waiver. So you'll be in contact with them if you have interest in either of those two things. With that said, I think we'll move it over to questions. Just scroll through here and see. William is asking if there are any thoughts on changing 75% requirement for schools who have COVID-related absences. So Jessica did answer that, and she's right. This would require a legislative change. There might be some relief coming through Senate Bill 664. But if that doesn't happen, and your district is starting to get close or miss the attendance requirement, or perhaps lose instructional time due to closures, what she suggested with thinking about distance learning is the route to go. It's going to take far less time to get distance learning off the ground. It does require that you think about how you're going to serve those students in distance. So is it possible that your district is able to roll out you know, technology to kids quickly, so that you can get them into a distance learning environment? You have to find out, are there pockets of kids who don't have technology at home, who would need it provided? You'd also want to consider students who don't have access to broadband at home for one reason or another. What are we going to do for those kids to ensure that they continue to be served? So, but either way, I think that our recommendation currently is distance learning as being a viable option.
Brian, we just got another question posted. What about student mentors recording? And I'm not even sure what a TWI is, but recording a TWI. Do those mentors need to be identified in any other system than their student information system at the school?
So that's a great question. TWI, for people who are curious, is a two-way interaction. So your mentor is going to be reported and attached to the student in TSDL as well. So that I believe that there's a specific code in TSDL to give to a mentor to identify that person. But yeah, that's the other place where you're going to expect to report beyond your SIS.
Another question just came in. Some ISDs are saying that 50A is the only option for providing virtual learning on a snow day or building closure day. But is 50D also an option if we can collect two-way communication or participation by class?
The simple answer is yes, that it is possible that you could use 50D virtual on a snow day, but it requires quite a bit of preparation, because you still have to satisfy all the same requirements that you'd have to satisfy in that section as if you were going to offer that class for the entire year. So you would have to have it board approved and posted in your catalog, and You'd have to have EDPs for kids and parental consent. You have to have a syllabus. So that's why I think people lean toward distance learning. Is that you could really pivot to that for a snow day quickly without having to jump through a bunch of hoops.
Great. Here's another one. How about students that exit the district and they were virtual learners? How does the school record their days attended when they're completing their SRM and other kinds of reports?
Yeah, so that's a good question too. The MSDS collection manual on page 10, and I only know that because I've had to look it up so many times for questions just like this one. It informs you of how to report the number of days of attendance. And it basically boils down to how many weeks was the student expected to participate or interact with their mentor or teacher of record with a TWE, right? TWE interaction. And then that becomes the denominator, and then however many weeks of 2A that you got is going to be your numerator.
Yeah, a follow-up question regarding the mentors. Just a clarification. Did they hear correctly that mentors doing two-way interactions do not need to be certified? It's the understanding of the person asking the question. They just need to be an employee of the district. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So the law requires that that person be a professional employee of the district, and typically a professional employee is going to be defined in your contracts. If not, then I think we would leave it up to district policy to determine what that means to the individual district. But yes, you don't need to be certified to be a mentor.
Not seeing other questions pop up yet.
Brian, this is Alicia with MAPSA, and you may have covered it, but I just want to kind of clarify. If you have, let's say, a class or even a grade level that you already have the information in place to move under 21F to 50D, and that grade or class, is quarantined for the week, they do not count in your 75% requirement because they're virtual for that week, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. If Senate Bill 664 passes, that might change, just to make sure everyone is aware of that. But yeah, currently the 100% virtual students are excluded from the 75% requirement and calculation.
So we're getting a couple other questions here regarding those mentors. So if an employee is not someone with a PIC, why would they put them on the TSDL? And since they're mentors, they're not certified, how are they attached to that TSDL?
Well, so maybe I misspoke, and I should clarify that I'm not an expert in the CEPI systems. But I did see someone that said that they need to be reported in rep. So that has me believing that instead of TSDL, insert the word rep. And that would then be an accurate statement. So you'd report those mentors in your rep. I can check to make sure that there isn't a additional requirement to have them attached through TSDL as well.
I believe that they are required to be reported in TSDL. I'm looking at the manual right now, so I think it may be in both places.
There we have it.
Brian and or Alicia, you guys referenced the Senate bills. So what would the change be regarding the virtual learning students not counting the 75% attendance rate?
So in Senate Bill 664, it actually has districts include virtual students in their attendance calculation. But here's where it gets kind of goofy. You know, these students aren't expected to be in attendance. In fact, 21F allows them to, you know, learn remotely from the teacher and separate by time, location, or both. So I don't know how we would translate that you know, flexibility into then including the students in attendance, unless we just said, you know what, you're a virtual learner, you're always in attendance, and maybe that's the intent. Alicia may have more information.
Yeah, I mean, the intent is to, you know, basically count them in attendance under that bill.
So they would always be in attendance. So we would just say you're a virtual learner, your attendance is 100% for this week. Is that am I thinking about that correctly?
I believe so. It's been a week or so since I read it again, but I believe that's the case, is that, you know, as long as there's an interaction or some, you know, the two-way interaction there, that they're counted in attendance for that week.
For all those attending here, should those Senate bills become they pass, we'll certainly provide additional clarification at the time. So stay tuned. Good discussion, though. I'll make sure I'm catching all the. There are some additional questions that have come in. Since the department does not consider 50A as virtual, quarantine students would count in your 75% daily attendance. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Students that are learning through distance learning, you know, we're treating them just like we would if they were in person. So you're going to take attendance and they'll be included in that calculation.
So I'm going to wait for some additional questions here, or Alicia, you may have some others that you know have been asked, but I want to jump ahead and say something here for all those in attendance, even for the department folks. We have what we call the Mastermind Network. If you're not part of it, you should be. You probably heard about today's webinar through the Mastermind Network, but we're going to be creating a special pupil accounting hub inside that Mastermind Network. You'd want to go in and identify that you want to be part of that. Join the hub by clicking on the left side of the menu items and looking for that topic and joining the pupil accounting area. That's going to be a place where we're going to share information we know is being put out by the department, sharing information that we're aware of, say like the Senate passage of those bills, or where you can share information that you're hearing. You can ask questions, we can have some discussions. So to all those in attendance that are interested in staying on top of this stuff, you're going to want to look for that pupil accounting area on our web-based platform, the Mastermind Network. And to the folks of the department, you're always good at this, but don't hesitate to share something with us that you think, well, that you know you want to get out to people, that might become a real popular question, or maybe a new development, a new insight on something. We'll make sure we get the word out. Here's another question. Outside the count day window, are schools required to document the weekly two-way interactions with students?
Yes, and that is because we are required to have chronic absenteeism reporting done for these students. So you're documenting these two-way interactions so that at the end of the school year you can perform that calculation of, you know, how many days were possible out of those that were actually attended.
Awesome. We also have a school that filed a common calendar waiver. How long does it take to find out if they've been approved?
It usually is the same day. So looks like Jessica is going to try to look into that for Tracy and get a copy out. And just a statement for all of us. I've been living these days by the
the idea that everybody has been experiencing sustained collective trauma. So patience, grace, follow-up is always probably appreciated. Somebody's probably working to get an answer out, or they missed it someplace. Other questions? Alicia, you got anything has been percolating?
No, nothing we haven't talked about.
Brian, Jessica, Stephen, Jeff, any other ideas that you've gotten in other discussions that you think we ought to be asking and maybe we haven't yet?
No, I think this group has come up with, at least from the Pupil accounting perspective, I think they've come up with the questions that we're typically seeing. I'm not sure if Steve or Jeff may have something that they want to add. I know that they have a vast perspective of alt-ed programs, including districts that are operating under some waivers.
I don't have anything to add. This is Steve. I don't have anything to add right now. I'm just scrolling back through to see, make sure all the questions were addressed. And if anybody has any they think were missed, maybe just put them again at the bottom of the chat.
Yeah, while Steve's doing that, this is Jeff. Any district or school that wants to reach out to us, Steve and I and Brian and Jessica will make ourselves available and really enjoy talking to districts and being their thought partners as they're looking at flexibility and helping them through that process. We notice a lot of times when we have those phone calls and talk through what they're trying to do, that it's possible to do what they'd like with the flexibility there. It's just like everything else. It takes four of us to kind of figure out what's going on. So we don't expect the district to know all the ins and outs. So there is a lot of flexibility there, and please feel free to call any of us, and so that we can set up a quick meeting and find out how we can help.
Yeah, it's a great reminder, Jeff. And Brian, you said that earlier, better to ask your ISD auditor or other folks, reach out to the department, ask those questions now so they both might hear something that they hadn't thought about before, but you're doing the things the way that it's going to be treated. There are a couple new questions here. Does the weekly two-way interaction apply to cyber schools as well?
Yeah, it does, because they still have the same responsibility for reporting that chronic absenteeism as well. So yeah, you've likely been reporting chronic absenteeism already in the past, and I wouldn't, if you have a different way of calculating that for your cyber school, rather than having it based on two-way interactions. I guess I'd like to hear about it.
Getting some kudos in the chat, Brian and team, for your responsiveness. So people have already seen that you are responding to those. It's appreciated. Here's a question about homebound students. We have a school that have several of them, and they're getting errors in their data validation for attendance. So how will how will they count their attendance in their SIS system to clear those errors?
That is a really good question. So we may need to actually have CEPI get involved. So Andrea, if you want to take down my email and just send me something quick, I can start looking into that for you.
Awesome, thank you. And then those of you who are attending, Jessica posted the link to the cyber school specific information.
I think Keith had a question, and it was a clarification. Are the year-long two-way interactions only for chronic absenteeism? If that's all that you're using them for, yes, but some districts are using the 2 ways for membership, which isn't year long. I mean, that applies during the count periods. So that the answer could be a little bit different. But either way, at least as it currently stands, districts that are operating under 50D, who have students who are 100% virtual, those students are not included in the 75% attendance requirement.
Excellent. Chat's been pretty busy, but I don't see new things popping up, but I kind of want to wait just a bit and see if more questions come up. Again, I'm going to remind people, I went through pretty extensively, but we are going to create a new topical area in the Mastermind Network on pupil accounting information and questions. So when you get done today, go back into the Mastermind Network, look for that topic, click that you want to be added to that pupil accounting area, and they'll be ready to watch for information and get your questions answered there, or share things that you're learning, etc. It's a great place to exchange stuff. Kind of along that line, again, I'm pausing just a little bit, not only to share some important information, but to inform all of you. Most of you probably are already, our attendees are on the Mastermind Network. Please know that there is a way that you can find out everything that's going on during the day in a very simple way. It's called the Daily Digest email. If you click into an area and you ask for updates, you're going to get a whole flurry of emails. You can go into the settings on the day of your Mastermind Network profile and get a Daily Digest email. So all it does is summarize everything that's happened in the areas you've expressed interest in. You get one email with a whole list of the things that changed during the day. It's that comes out at 5 o'clock every day. It's an easy way to get a summary of the activity you're most interested in. So make sure that you sign up for that Pupil Accounting Hub, and then make sure you set your settings to that daily email digest. I'm not seeing any new questions in here. Brian, Jessica, Stephen, Jeffrey, we totally appreciate your time, your accessibility, your responsiveness. We know this hasn't been easy for all of you either, but we appreciate you working hard to support the schools and doing what they're trying to do and keeping kids engaged and safe and healthy. So we appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.